Hello, and thanks for joining us on Relational Practice, a social work podcast. I'm Dr. Jodie Park.
I'm Mackey, and we're both private practice social workers here in New South Wales, Australia, working in the fields of child protection, out-of-home care and trauma. And today we're recording this episode on Darawal land.
Thank you for listening. We would love for you to subscribe, rate and review our podcast and connect with us on Facebook, Instagram and via our new YouTube page. We'll be adding content and videos to all the platforms regularly. Also, please check out our new webpage, Relational Practice, a socialworkpodcast.com.au, all lowercase. You can access episodes, information, and also some ambiguous loss printables via our webpage.
As always, please send us any practice stories, questions, comments, feedback to relationalpractice01@gmail.com or on any of our social media platforms.
And I'm just going to say this, Rose has told me I have to look at the camera a little bit more. So if I look weird, if you're watching this on YouTube, that's why, blame Rose. I had to put that in.
Thanks, Jodie. I'm pretty sure all of our listeners know that we are not very good with the tech. And we're currently making Angus pull his hair out and go very grey because of our tech issues of late.
We were actually just laughing because we had an email from Angus, and Angus does all of our editing. He's amazing. Thank you, Angus. And I was telling Rose that in Angus's last email, he said, "I've just looked at the video. Oh no." We were like, oh well. It is what it is.
Said that was on the weekend, that email. I'm like, well, days have gone past. What are we going to do? And Jodie's like, don't worry about it.
That's right. It is what it is. How bad can it be? I'm sure there's been worse. And I'm sure there'll be worse to come. Anyway, let's get on topic.
What are we talking about today?
We are going to talk about making mistakes in practice. But more, I think we're going to talk about learning from those mistakes and kind of linking that to the development of professional judgment.
Sounds pretty in-depth and involved, I have to say.
Well, I mean, let's hope it's informative at least. I'm not sure how in-depth and involved it'll be, but hopefully it's informative. And the way that, if you've listened to more than one of us, not more than one of us, but more than one of our episodes, you will know that we kind of relate to everything to our own practice, and I guess we try and make sense of the theory by using plain language. So we'll definitely be doing that today.
We don't know any other way to do it.
No,
so
that's true.
That's what we'll be doing. I guess we wanted to do an episode really on the things that keep us up at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
The mistakes we make.
Yeah.
And how there's a whole kind of different bucket or, what's the word I'm looking for, Jodie? Heading of mistakes we make. It's not always, ethical mistakes or administrative mistakes or clinical mistakes.
Yep.
There's a lot of different mistakes that can be made in the field of child protection, out-of-home care, social work practice, welfare practice, whatever domain of practice you're in.
Yeah.
We are humans. We make mistakes all the time. But we did generate this idea from thinking about those things that keep us up at 3 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah, but then also going one step further and just trying to get this message across that making mistakes is absolutely normal, which is what you're saying. And it's inevitable. Like, it's going to happen. We are going to make mistakes because at any given time you can only do and act and make decisions based on what you know at that time.
Yes.
So I think with the benefit of hindsight, I think there's lots of situations, and we've talked about some on this podcast already, where we would do things very differently. If we knew now what we knew then, or if we had access to the same resources or something, if something was different, but it wasn't different. And it's what happened. And sometimes I think when I look back at some of the things that I would classify as really big mistakes in my own practice, they're still mistakes, but I kind of need to, and at the time they were terrible. I remember terrible, but I really need to think about, and I had to get myself to this place at the time and still now, where I think about what did I learn from those mistakes, because it's always about the learning.
It is about the learning.
It needs to be. And if you work in a culture or in an environment where it is this notion that mistakes are inevitable, and that it is all about learning, then you're going to be a much healthier practitioner.
What if you work in an environment where no one talks about mistakes?
And they're hidden. Or if, what were you going to say?
Or if generally there's a sense that I have some authority on this topic and I don't make mistakes.
I mean, it's such an unhealthy, toxic environment, isn't it? If that's the characteristic, if those things, are the characteristics of the work environment you find yourself in, and we've found ourselves in those work environments, then it's toxic and it's going to be unhealthy, and it's not going to be conducive to sustainable practice, I don't think.
Yet I see professionals who I would view as working in those types of environments who have sustained themselves in careers, for a decade or more.
Are they well?
I mean,
on a personal level, on a psychosocial level, on an emotional level, are they well?
I'd say potentially no. Not well, but who
managing
holds the mirror up about the impact on clients?
And I think that's the issue, isn't it? I'm just going to say this. I can remember when I left a very toxic workplace, and I was only there for a very short time. And I left that workplace, and while I was in that workplace, I'd had experiences of other toxic workplaces, so I didn't realise just how damaging this workplace was at the time. But when I left, that's when I realised just how bad it was. And I think I can say that about you as well. When you left a particularly toxic workplace, it's only on reflection that you can hold the mirror up to yourself and realise how it actually impacted on your life.
Yes.
And how you had to, we talked about appeasement a few episodes back, how you had to actually you had to appease yourself in some ways because you were running on survival. I was running on survival. And I think I would say that a lot of people that work in environments, and this is just a general view, I'm sure there's research out there, but obviously I don't know it because that's my life. But if you work in an environment where you feel like you can't make a mistake, you feel like you have to always be right, you feel like you have to always be in control, if someone does make a mistake, they're vilified within the environment, everyone knows about it, then you are not going to be, how can you be actually psychosocially well?
You raise a good point. And then think of the parallel to the outcomes on clients. And the other part of this too, in mistakes in these fields of practice, is often we don't stay in long term. So we're not necessarily going to have a first-hand, look into the impact of our practice on everyone. So sometimes we might not even be aware if our practice was damaging, if we have made mistakes, or if we actually were practicing ethically with, sound knowledge base, and we used all of our professional judgment for a good outcome. Sometimes in the lines of work that we're in, we don't get to see what actually occurs down the track to know about our practice, do we? So sometimes it's quite hidden too.
It's really hidden. You're right, because you can't forward look, I guess.
Yeah, there's no crystal balls.
Yeah, that's a better way of putting it. You can't go, what's going to happen to this person in 10 years' time? And then you have to kind of then consider the other influences on them in those years to work out, how much of this was influenced by what I did, the mistake that I feel like I made, and then, or how much of this, let me put that a different way. How much was this influenced by what I feel like I did to this person, good or bad, or in combination with all of the other influences.
Yes, and that combination of other influences, I think, is so pertinent in so many of the individuals or family systems we work in. 100%. So rare is it that there's no combination of other influences. So rare. Whether it's other systems influences, previous abuse experiences, current context, whatever it may be, there's always a combination of complicating factors that intersect an individual's life, which further complicate. You're trying to unpack and think about your practice and the mistakes you might have made, or the practice that actually might have been really sound and solid and helpful.
Yeah, true. Because it's, you know, we kind of, there's that quote, isn't it? Social work doesn't happen in a vacuum. Social work is just part of the fabric of social expectations at any given time. Because it is so socially constructed.
It's a lot to think about, isn't it?
God, it makes your brain hurt, doesn't it?
It does. So today we're going to look at the work of Professor Eileen Munro to kind of dismantle this whole perspective. So Professor Eileen Munro reminds us that in a system built on uncertainty, mistakes aren't just possible, they are statistically inevitable.
Yeah. And she talked about this 1999. I'll put the citation in the show notes, but I'm sure it was around 1999. Like,
I think you're right.
Like such an oldie, but still such a goodie.
I would agree. When sometimes I read, job advertisements, and one of the selection criteria often is like contemporary knowledge, contemporary understanding of theories. I would say, in my view, Professor Eileen Munro's work on predictable errors in especially the practice of child protection is still very contemporary if we're using the words that are in selection criteria.
Yeah.
So relevant still, however many years later this is, 26, 27 years later.
100%. But I think whilst she focuses in child protection out of home care practice, what she writes about is about social work practice. Because it's about practice. It's about on the ground, how do you actually do what you do? But it's also about how do you know how to do what you do, which is what I like, because that's what I'm interested in.
Yes. It's about the thinking, isn't it?
The thinking.
It's the cognitive aspect of social work.
Absolutely.
So Professor Eileen Munro distinguishes between clinical errors, administrative errors, ethical violations, which I think is also a really good framework, because when we were thinking about, when I was thinking about what kind of practice examples, one, am I feeling vulnerable enough to share on this podcast? It was interesting the type of mistakes, errors that I thought of instantly. I made one huge administrative error, which actually had a very real life impact on a carer and a child years ago. And so it made me wonder about administrative errors and how they can cross into clinical errors.
100%. I mean, I made a huge administrative error that I still think about. It was in a academic context, and I still think about the impact that had on that student at that time.
Oh, it was in an academic context?
It was in an academic context, and it was huge. It was a huge administrative error, and I felt sick about it. I still feel sick about it.
Yes. There's this, when you think about what grounds you in your practice or what gets you through the hard days, and I think about how many nights we have spent awake at 3 a.m. thinking, worrying, processing, ruminating, looping, whichever may be the case at that particular time, on a decision or a family or a child.
Yeah.
I started years ago thinking, like, trying to quantify, I guess, the impact to how much time do I need to spend worrying down this rabbit hole, especially if it's about things I can't change. And one of the things I often ask my oldest child is this going to be an issue in 5 years? Is this going to be really important in 5 years' time? And if it's not, let it go. If it's going to be important in a year's time, all right, we need to do something about it. And so I started thinking, am I still going to be thinking about this in 5 years' time? And my administrative error, I believe I made that around 2008, and I still think about that often.
Yeah.
And I wonder still the impacts that I didn't see, because years later I'm not in touch. Obviously, I'm not working with that child or that carer. I wonder the impact it had in the long term that I will never know about.
Yeah, I agree. Do you know what? I'm going to go off topic just a tiny bit, because your story is reminding me of something. I remember doing after hours child protection work, and I had this one call out. It wasn't when we were partners. They were fun days. They were fun days. No, it wasn't
fun nights.
Lots of fun nights. It was with somebody else, and it was a big case. Like it was a big deal at the time, and it involved a child being harmed. and the child at the time was not in the care of either parent and was in the care of a babysitter. And I remember being directed, this is like 2 a.m. or something, being directed by like the centralised helpline, which becomes your manager when you're on after hours. They tell you what to do.
Excuse me.
That I needed to remove the babysitter's children, as well as the children that were, obviously the child that was harmed, plus also the sibling. The child that was harmed was being managed by the police, the child protection police team. So I had to remove the sibling and the babysitter's children. And I remember refusing to remove the babysitter's children because I remember arguing so clearly, saying there's no grounds to remove those children. You can't remove children willy-nilly just because you feel like this person could possibly have been responsible for harming a child when you don't really know.
Isn't that the point of why you were there, to assess the situation?
Yes. And the issue I had with that is that there was absolutely no child protection history for this babysitter. Nothing. I'd been in the home. Everything looked okay. She was appropriately upset. The child actually was injured a day before it got to the babysitter's home.
Is that information you knew?
I knew at the time. Helpline knew at the time. That was a crucial bit of information, wasn't it?
Yes.
So I think often about that, because if I had just gone in there and said, yep, I'm going to remove these children, imagine the trauma that would have happened to those children for no reason. There was no reason to remove those children.
So when you were directed,
Yeah.
were you given a rationale, I guess, for someone's decision?
It was a risk averse response. It was about the fact that, yes, we've been told by the hospital this injury likely happened to you, the day before or whatever it was, prior to the kid going to the babysitter. But how do we know that for sure? That's just like a preliminary opinion at this stage.
I'm going to have a stab in the dark that this was quite a few years ago.
It was.
And as you're telling me, I'm thinking about
Yeah.
how far in the state we're in we've swung to the other side. You're talking about very risk-adverse practice.
Very risk-averse practice.
And I feel like that continuum just swung so far back the other way.
Yeah. Yep.
To risk-ignoring practice, almost.
Mm. But isn't it like, for me, it's this kind of example of, one, how easy it is to get something wrong, and then and not consider the consequences on everybody involved. But two, how you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach, because what you're saying is exactly right. We become so possibly risk-ignoring. I don't know if it's risk-ignoring or is it more around trying to safety plan to death? Do you think it's about risks being identified, but then instead of, there's this kind of swing away from bringing children into care, which is absolutely appropriate if that's what should happen. Yes. They shouldn't come into care. Absolutely appropriate to safety plan. But I think it's that one-size-fits-all approach. It's like there's no individual kind of consideration.
No, there's no nuance in individual children's lives. I don't know. So probably a different topic. I go down the rabbit hole of it's all about being fiscally responsible or trying to meet a budget. And so we swing so far back this way because having children in a care system is incredibly expensive. If we can have children at home, it's not as financially intensive on the systems.
I mean, I agree with that. I agree with that. We bang on about that all the time, don't we?
We do.
When it's just, and usually when we're avoiding work.
But going back to your example, when we talked about this, I think in the last episode, maybe about being reflective and being reflexive, that's a really good example of being reflexive in the moment and understanding that the direction you were given not only was possibly potentially a really critical clinical error in practice, but also the ability to think about the information you actually had at hand, to analyse it and to make sense of it, and then to challenge a directive given.
Yeah, I think for me it's such a good example of analytical reasoning, where you are putting quite quickly, because you don't have a lot of time, you are putting information together for it to kind of make sense.
Yes.
But I don't think that there is an emphasis now on taking the time to do that. And we're not talking about taking an hour to make one decision. That's not what I'm talking about. But I think in any given scenario, you should be able to take 5-10 minutes out of a response to be able to think things through.
Yes.
And if you can't, then there's something wrong.
I always in practice when I was in child protection, when I was practicing, if you had to remove a child, you had to write the reasons why you were going to remove a child, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you'd see some pretty common words across different assumption or removal papers.
Yeah.
And I used to say to the practitioners that I was supervising, when they were in the field and they'd bring back and say, I don't think this child is safe and can stay, we need to take really intrusive action, I'd say, justify it to me. If you can articulate it and I can ask you, I'd almost put them on the stand on the phone call and you can answer the questions and we can have this process where it is not adversarial, but really in-depth challenging around, is this an assumption? Is this a bias? Is this factual? How have you tested that? What other hypothesis have you come up with? Yeah. To then be like satisfied that I'd put my name on a removal or an assumption paper. Yeah. Because it's it's a massive decision to be making. Yeah. But I think being able to articulate and have, as you said, not take an hour, but have a very involved conversation where there's some kind of rigor around what you're saying.
Well, I think what you're talking about, again, is around applying analytical reasoning. And I think that is kind of good because whilst I thought we were going off topic, we're actually on topic because that's what Munro says. She says that there's two kind of ways that we make sense of information, that we process information, particularly in the moment. So when you're kind of enacting that kind of reflexive, what's that word?
Reflexivity. Reflexive.
I can't say reflexivity. Oh, I just said it. Yay. Okay. All right. But I'm not going to try it again. But when you are trying to make sense of information in the moment, I'm going to put it that way, then we can rely on intuitive reasoning or we can rely on analytical reasoning. And intuitive reasoning is where we do things really quickly. We do it really automatically. We process lots of information quickly, but we apply our own emotion and cognitive bias to that information. We do it all the time about everything. Everything. We have a feel about something, or something reminds us of something that happened before and we know how we responded in that scenario. So we apply that learning to the new scenario. That's all intuitive reasoning, really. Whereas what you were describing, and I guess what I was describing, was analytical reasoning, where you kind of have this process of slow, logical sense-making.
Explicit, Eileen says.
To be able to make sense of something. And I think analytical reasoning is more closely aligned with professional judgment, but intuitive reasoning is part of it as well. But it's about the importance you put on either one.
Either one.
I think.
And I think Eileen Munro talks about analytical reasoning being mentally exhausting and time consuming.
Well, it is.
So you can see why in practice, areas of practice where you have an overwhelming amount of demand, limited resources, that analytic reasoning may be reduced or minimized, and intuitive reasoning may be overwhelmingly the primary way that practitioners process information.
Well, and we know that not everyone works that way. Not everyone's brain is wired to be able to process information quickly and get things right. Right. That's why mistakes are inevitable, because you can't get things right when you're not actually you don't have the opportunity to really think things through on a deeper level.
Yeah. It's so true.
Yeah.
I did a training course recently, facilitated training to a group of scientists. That was really scary. And when I say scientists, I don't mean social scientists. I mean
scientists.
Real scientists.
Yeah.
And it was, I guess, around trauma, the impacts of trauma and vicarious trauma. So these scientists work in a space where they're often in contact with lots of different clients who have or are experiencing a range of trauma symptoms. And so the training was about what is trauma and vicarious trauma and what are some of the types of ways in which you can, I guess, safeguard yourself from vicarious trauma, burnout, or stress. And it was the most quiet training I've ever facilitated. And after a few hours, I was like, guys, am I not hitting the mark? Like, the total silence. No one was speaking. And one brave person said, I'm going to need 6 days to think about this and then come back to you. And then they were like, yeah, we'll need some time to process this. And I was like, oh, yeah. How did I not even, I didn't consider that. Normally in a training environment, you know, you have 4 or 5 kind of people who are really willing to talk and engage and reflect and, you know, they're verbal processing too. But a whole group of scientists who needed a lot of processing time. And I was like, oh, it felt so strange.
But how interesting is that? Because, you know, you would expect that profession, you would expect a scientist to really have some clear analytical reasoning skills, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Because they need to, because it's all about facts and it's all about evidence. And I guess in social work, we claim to be evidence-based, don't we? We claim that our practice has to go back to a model, has to go back to some information that's been tested. But I wonder how true that is in the moment.
Yeah. It's an interesting kind of comparison, isn't it?
It really is.
And even my expectation that people can process information quickly, you know, and provide reflections or examples in a training, I was like, wow, Rose, completely off the mark I was.
Because that's what you're used to, though.
So used to.
You're used to that expectation where, you know, somebody says something, somebody has to say something in return. Because if you don't, like, let's face it, if you're in a room of practitioners and you are not saying something, you feel like you are really dumb. You feel like...
That was always me. One, I think what I want to say is probably a little too heated and we're going to come off wrong, because most of the times if I wanted to talk in a meeting, in the work we did, I was a little bit fired up or thinking of all the things that someone else hadn't thought of.
Yeah.
Or I would be sitting there thinking, I actually don't know what this person has just said for the last 15 minutes, so I can't contribute because I'm so lost in the content. So I was often sitting there thinking, I'm an idiot. And I was either quiet or on a rampage, like, you haven't considered this, and pointing out all the, you know, all the steps that had been neglected. What were you like in those meetings?
I mean, I think probably very similar to you. I was, very similar to you. I'm kind of someone who, I'm still the same now, unless I actually have something that I feel like would be useful to contribute. I don't, because I think there's other people here that are saying stuff. Usually, I'm going to say this, usually I don't understand half of what they're saying because there's this jargonistic kind of language that people hide behind. We've talked about that before. And I can't be bothered deciphering that because I just think that's crap. Like, I think it's bullshit. To be fair, I do. You know I do.
I love that you're like, I'm just not going to even
So I don't engage.
Decipher.
Because I'm like, talk to me like a proper person, or I'm just not going to enjoy this conversation. So I'm actually going to disengage. And that's kind of what I do. Unless it's something I really care about, and that's different.
Yeah.
But I get lost pretty quickly when I have to engage in a conversation that I just think is useless. Kind of. And, yeah, when we both worked for the same organisation, I was sometimes quite vocal because when I was on a rampage. But it wasn't really about... Sometimes it was about the context of the meeting. Most of the time it was about the baggage I brought into that meeting with me.
Yeah. I mean, good reflection there.
Yeah, I didn't always know that at the time, but I definitely know that now. And I feel sorry because sometimes I was on a rampage directed towards people that I shouldn't have directed stuff to.
Oh.
I know sometimes I have some reflection, Rose, sometimes. All right, let's get back to this. So we talked about reasoning, which is kind of the process of how we think. Yeah? That's the way to put that.
Yep.
And that, you know, when we kind of like this when we have this fast-paced expectation that we will just kind of solve this problem really quickly and then we'll move on to the next problem.
Next one.
That's right. You don't have time to stop. You don't have time to think. You don't have time to connect information. You don't have time to do any of that, basically. And I honestly think that is the world that we're practicing now. We don't, because we're private practitioners and we can control our world a little bit more.
Yes.
But I think if you were to work for an agency now, particularly child and family, that would be the world you'd find yourself in. Don't you think?
I do think. I was pausing, wondering how I would actually carry that mental load again, and how I would, I think, knowing what I know now, how I would be able to use analytical reasoning much, much more purposefully than my intuitive reasoning. But what is the toll then on me as a person? What's the toll on the families? What does it look like in relation to my relationship with my supervisor and the expectation of whatever agency I'm working for?
You know what, I reckon you could probably think about what the toll was when you worked in that environment, because I know, Rose, I worked with you. You were like me. We worked long hours. We did things that other people didn't do in terms of reviewing files, in terms of making sure we knew about every kid on the caseload. Yeah?
Yep.
Not everyone did that.
It's exhausting.
It was exhausting. We took work home. It was that I think is the way that you put in place some analytical reasoning when you work in an environment where that's not supported. You have to do it in your own time. And that's not okay.
No.
It's not okay. And again, it goes back to that point where we started this conversation around that's really one of the characteristics, surely, of a toxic environment. And then to your point, 2 points you've made that I think are pearlers. Who holds the mirror up to that? Of course. So how do you know you're in that environment, and how do you know the damage it's doing to you? So who holds that mirror up, and when does that mirror get held up? But also, what does that do for the clients?
It's really interesting when you actually break it down and think about it, isn't it?
It's kind of sad. It made me kind of sad just then. I was like, it's a sad little world we bloody live in.
I think it's also, in our context of New South Wales right now, kind of imperative and important too, because our system is undergoing some changes, or potentially about to undergo some changes. And what Eileen Munro says is that errors aren't random acts of incompetence, but they're predictable products of human psychology. And so when we work under pressure with complex, uncertain information, our brains use mental shortcuts, and they can lead to systemic biases. And so I wonder what is our current system looking at right now in relation to Eileen Munro's work on common errors of reasoning in child protection work.
Can I just say this one thing? I don't want to talk about this a lot because it's a whole nother subject, and it's very New South Wales based. What we're talking about is the child protection out of home care system. And I just want to say one thing. How dumb is the government? Because
That's not what I thought you were going to say, but okay.
But how dumb are they? Like, you can't just put out this blueprint, completely change the system by giving people minimal information and then actually expect a good work to be done.
Well, if you think about this intuition versus analysis, and even the thinking around that.
Yeah, I know. And one other reason they're dumb, let's face it, because really what they're talking about is going back to the way the system was. What do you reckon? When was the Wood Royal Commission? 2008? 2009?
I just got a memory for numbers, not me. But it sounds about right.
It's going back to the way the system was before we had a Royal Commission that came in and said this system is not working for these reasons. So it's just reinventing a wheel that was broken in the first place. What is wrong with people, Rose?
Well, it's that swing, isn't it, that we talked about from practice risk adverse to maybe, what's the better word for the opposite of risk adverse than what I used? I said risk ignoring. So whatever that word is. And then the roundabout and swings, isn't it? We just go from one end to the other, or we go back on our wheel and we go back to how things were, and then we flip back to the other way of doing and being. It's just, but if you think about it from a practitioner's point of view, and we always say this, it's not the practitioner.
No,
it's the system that they work in and the framework that supports them to do their work. But if we know that errors in practice aren't random acts of incompetence and they're predictable.
Well, if we think about mistakes in that way,
then what are we doing to safeguard the practitioners right now that are working in a system that's in, again, the midst of another massive change?
Well, I think we're doing nothing. And I think actually what our government is doing is blaming those workers for doing a shit job when they were not in charge of the system. Workers make up the system, of course. We know every single person that works in that environment has a role to play in terms of making up the culture. We know that.
Yeah.
But it's very hard to fight against a culture and a system that, one, does not respect you as a worker, has unrealistic, ridiculous expectations of what you will achieve in your role, and then doesn't actually want to spend the money. And I know there's this big glossy brochure that says, we're spending all this money, but honestly, it's never like that in reality. Doesn't want to actually spend the money and listen to the right people about where that money should be spent. Instead, it's going to reinvent this ridiculous will from 20 years ago that was shit then. It's going to be shit now. That was my high hopes moment.
Yeah.
How do you feel about
I
it?
enjoyed it.
Yeah.
But I think if we go back to that, the practitioners, what you're saying is, it's almost, the system almost sets them up.
Yes.
They have this
Yes.
sense of expectations and targets and standard of what the work should look like, yet they don't support their staff with resources internally or externally to actually do the work that they hold them then to a standard of when they're analysing, unpacking, unpicking their work.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then what happens is, for practitioners on the front line doing the actual work, I would wonder how many reasoning traps those practitioners are then falling into, aligned with Eileen Munro's work around confirmation bias, availability bias, the primacy effect. Did I say that right? Primacy effect. And over-reliance on compliance.
I mean,
What does that look like for those practitioners?
Well, I think that's the world we're working, isn't it? So, you know, I think if you think about those 1, 2, 3, 4 points that Eileen Munro says kind of feature in systems that are not working the best. Yeah. I think that's what we see all of the time. I think we definitely see that. I think people and I attribute no blame to individual practitioners about this, but I think if it's easier for you to see something in a certain way because that's either the way you've been told to see it, or that's the quickest way,
or the system is pushing you to see it that way.
For example, all children should be restored. That is an absolute confirmation bias that people then applied when they looked at the current level of risk in families when they were considering restoration.
Yeah.
Because really what that does is minimize risk, because your confirmation bias is because the system has enforced this, that you will restore, I don't know, whatever the figure was that you had, the target was you had to meet. So you would therefore be going through all of your cases trying to find families to fit the target. Instead of actually applying analytical reasoning, which says, okay, well, these were the risk factors then, these are the risk factors now. Can we mitigate these factors? Yes or no? If yes, how possible is that? How sustainable is that? What does that mean in terms of safety for the child now and in the future? Instead of it, well, these were the risk factors then. I'm not really seeing any risk factors now because I know that I have to meet a target.
Or I don't have a placement.
I remember being on the stand once, and I was actually thinking about this morning, and then before I was driving up here. I remember being on the stand once, like giving evidence, saying as part of my evidence, when a solicitor said to me, oh yeah, but there's no placement, surely this child would be better off going home because there's no placement. And I remember sitting on the stand saying, Daddy, you can't make good placement decisions when that is the rationale for the decision. Like, you can't just put a kid home who's been removed because there's no placements. That's actually not okay, and it's not good enough.
What was the response from the courts?
There was kind of stunned silence. And I wish at the time, because I think at the time I said it in this kind of like that way, and I wish at the time I'd been more forceful about it.
I do too.
Because it's such a true point, and it's such a valid point.
It is so true, so valid, and I'm so glad you said it, because I was having this conversation only a few weeks ago with practitioners in the system who feel like they're being forced to consider restoration because there are no placements, and consider it based on information such as, well, mum moved states and there's no criminal record in our state anymore for mum.
Oh, well, hallelujah.
Oh, I was
Amazing.
like, well, is that the basis of which we decide restoration? And then it went to, well, feeling very much pressured into exploring this. Mum can't come to our state because she'll be arrested by the police because there's still existing warrants for her arrest. So she said, happy to see my child, bring her to my current state across the other side of the country, happy to have contact here but can't come to New South Wales.
Are you kidding me?
Still were asked, so are we going to consider restoration? And I was like, I understand, and this is one of the things that kept me up at 3 a.m, having no place for children. I understand how real that pressure is. I understand about all of the worries, the complexity that comes with that. But having no placement doesn't equate to a confirmation bias of mum has no longer a criminal record in New South Wales for the last 10 years. She hasn't lived here for 11. And she clearly has warrants for her arrest because she can't come into our state, and no one checked the state in which she was living to see if she had any police involvement or what life was even like. It was purely, would you like to see your child? We don't have a placement and we'd like to consider restoration.
So sad, isn't it? It's so sad. And I don't think it's child protection only this happens to. Think about mental health. Think about people that can't access adolescents can't access mental health. The only option is to go to hospital, and it sounds like, from what people tell me, not my first-hand experience, but it sounds like when they go to hospital, because there are no beds, because there is no follow-up, the health staff are all about trying to work out how to get them out again quickly. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not just, we're not just talking about this kind of this is child protection out of home care specific, it's across the board. And because it's across the board, then there's a real problem, isn't there?
And the problem that trickles down to the workers on the front line is being analytical or being intuitive.
Yeah.
And what are the reasoning traps that we all fall into because of those pressures?
Yeah. I like, I actually really love the fact that Eileen Munro talks about the fact that one of the biggest reasoning traps is that the primacy effect, which really is about your first impression often sticks.
Do you know, I think about that often, and it's really interesting. I think about it when I like the people that I'm assessing. My internal voice is often, and it goes against all of that active listening stuff that we talk about.
Yeah.
But my internal voice is, well, you've instantly felt at ease with these people and like these people. You need to turn on all of your senses. And I feel like I almost interrogate then the people I'm assessing to see if I've actually fallen into that primacy trap. Isn't that terrible?
No, I don't think it is
I don't know
terrible.
how to balance it.
Well, I kind of think it's impressive that you can trigger that secondary response, that you know yourself so well that you trigger that, because I'm sure it wouldn't come across as being interrogating, because I've seen you in action. You don't interrogate people. You're actually quite respectful.
But I feel like I'm like, in my internal voice is like, well, Rose, this could be a common mistake. Don't get comfortable here.
The only time I've seen you interrogate, there's probably been more times. You know what I'm going to talk about, don't you?
No, I'm worried.
When we were at a police station once, and I was being
so nice.
I was being
professional.
really nice and professional. I mean, it was like 3 a.m, and then Rose, you lost your cool, and you slammed the table, and you said, "I've had enough of this."
This is not how to practice, guys. Do not take this. This is a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. There was a lot going on. It was an after-hours response. We were sitting there with this mother that was not telling us anything. I had tried to be kind. I tried to be nice. I tried to be professional. It still wasn't working. Rose came in with the big guns. But the thing that still cracks me up is you hitting that table. This is not okay.
I was wild, wasn't I?
You were, yeah.
Thank goodness I have grown in my professionalism most of the time.
Yeah, but your practice was a reflection of of what you had going on at the time, though.
Poor mum.
No, she was all right. She was fine. Like, truly.
How do we know that?
Well, we don't know that, but I'm sure she was fine. I mean, we just needed some answers, and she needed to give them, and she did give them.
Eventually.
Eventually.
Took a long time, more time than what I had to offer.
That's true.
Yep.
True. Anyway, I went off topic again.
What about when you are given that first piece of information as a referrer? So someone's referring to you, and the first pieces of information they give you are painting somewhat of a negative picture. How do you work around that in the primacy effect?
It depends on the thing. So if I've been asked to do an assessment, say, of someone, and I've been given all of this, like, lots and lots of information, I will, like, screen the information, but I don't read it in depth until after I meet them. And I do that most of the time. And the reason I do that is because I don't want to prejudge. I don't want to go in there with a confirmation bias. I actually want to be able to meet somebody, kind of meeting them at their level at the moment. And then, of course, then I have to go back and I have to read everything.
And I think, so the primacy effect, according to Eileen Munro, says that first impressions are incredibly sticky.
Yeah.
The first piece of information a worker receives about a family often acts as an anchor, biasing every assessment that follows.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like when people are ringing to give me a referral,
Yeah.
I'm so vague and I wonder how they must experience it. And I don't take notes. I will do a quote based on whatever the assessment is. And then, like you, I don't read a lot of the information. I try and at least get who's who in the family system.
Yeah.
And that's as much as I try and do. But I often feel myself sitting across from the people that I'm assessing or doing a piece of work with, and they must be thinking, didn't that agency tell you anything? And I'm like, oh, who's that? Or tell me a bit more about that. I'm quite, well, a few times lately, actually, the people I've been assessing and said, haven't you been told this? And then I have to say, oh, the agency has provided that information, absolutely, but I'm yet to read it in any great detail. And one couple recently rolled their eyes and were like, oh, and I was thinking, well, how is that experience? But that's how I try to kind of think about that primacy effect. But I also wonder about the people referring, because I must sound so vague. I write nothing. I'd really just, what are you asking for? So I can provide a quote, because I'm trying really hard not to be anchored in either the positive or the negative. But I think at times it makes me look pretty vague.
Yeah, but also, look, the nature of our work is that we might send 10 quotes and only get one response. Do you know what I mean? We get asked stuff all the time, don't we?
Yep.
So how much time can you actually invest?
Well, there's that. But the reason we do it is around that primacy effect, because we do anchor.
I mean, no, for quoting, the reason we do it is because of what I said.
Oh,
to
be fair. But, you know, if someone's actually taking the time to ring you, you don't get the email for a quote, and they talk about the case, then I'm trying not to go down that hole and asking questions and taking the information, because it is true. I find it's true. You get anchored by the first kind of detail you're given about the family system or the situation.
True.
Can be a trap.
Can be a huge trap. Absolutely, it can be a trap. And it can, definitely lead you to a mistake, because if you are not as aware as you are, because you're really aware of that, but if you're not aware of that and you don't ever challenge your anchored point of view, that first impression, you don't ever challenge that, then you're going to make decisions based on that.
Yes. And sometimes your anchored view is professionally sound in judgment, right?
Yeah,
and it will lead to an outcome. It doesn't mean that the anchor is incorrect. It means that you have to, rigorously test.
You just have to test.
To make sure. So you also talked about confirmation bias. So this is where we form that initial view of a family. Either they're absolutely doing their very best and mum is trying so hard, and then you go and you find the information that supports this view.
Do you know, 100% I still think about a piece of advice I got from one of my very first managers, who says, and I always change the ratio in terms of what she said because I can never remember, so I make it fit mine. But she said to me, if you are doing 80% of the work, she may have said a different figure, but I said 80% of the work and the client is doing 20%, then there's actually something wrong there. And you need to be always going back and thinking about what actually is happening here. And I think about that all of the time.
Do you agree with that?
I do, and depending on what role you're in.
Okay.
So if you're in a case management role, 100% I agree with that.
What if it's about actually that their capacity is so limited?
Well, that would be different, wouldn't it?
Would it?
I think it would. So if you're talking about someone who has, say, a cognitive capacity limitation or a physical limitation, then what you would expect them to do, though, would be within their capacity.
Okay, I like that you clarified that, because I hear practitioners say that, and I've had people say that to me in supervision recently. I'm not going to work harder than the client. And I think, oh, there's a whole lot of nuance around that, and I don't ever hear that part come out.
So maybe that is, I'm glad you clarified that, maybe that's the thing that needs to be clarified when someone says that. But for me, it's been a bit like my mantra.
Yeah.
In a counselling role, that's not the same. Although in a counselling role, it can be the same. If I am doing a lot of the talking, then there's something wrong in that session.
Yes.
And I need to stop and think about that, because I shouldn't be doing a lot of the talking, because this isn't about me. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
In, say, in a case management role, if I'm doing everything and the person is just showing up occasionally when they have to, definitely something's wrong there. Yep. What other roles? What other roles can we talk about?
What about therapeutic interventions, like a life story work intervention?
Life story work. I mean, that's a little bit different, I think, because in life story work, the purpose of therapy is to process information alongside sharing information. So it's this kind of two-way thing. You're giving and you're receiving at the same time. So there will definitely be times where the therapist will be doing more.
Yes.
Than the client, because that's the way the intervention model actually works. Yeah.
Yep, that's validating for me. Thank you.
Yeah, it just depends. It depends on the role. Definitely depends on the role. But if you, say, have a case plan, you're working with someone, you have a case plan, you may not have developed the case plan, you might just be part of the case plan, and you find yourself being more concerned about the case plan goals and tasks than the person is, then there's a bit of an indicator there that there might be an issue.
Yeah. Okay, I agree. I just think there's a nuance around that.
100% there is. It always has to be about capacity.
And I think our confirmation bias works both ways. We either form a positive initial view and we seek information about that, or we form a negative view and we find all the information about that. And what happens is when people come with information that doesn't fit our confirmed bias, we ignore it, or we minimize it, or we justify it, or we excuse it, and we don't seriously consider analytically what this information is telling us.
Yeah, 100%. That's absolutely what happens, isn't it? That's absolutely what happens. And that's such a product of an environment that doesn't support learning. It doesn't support mistakes.
No.
Because all of this is about, you do not want to make a mistake. You do not want to make a mistake. You want to make sure that you are in control all of the time. And you can't be in control all the time because we're people. Sometimes we have to make mistakes. Sometimes we have to lose our shit. Sometimes we have to say the wrong thing.
Slam your hand on a table and say, I'm sick of this.
I'm sick of this. Sometimes you do have to do that. Sometimes you have to apologise because you were clearly wrong.
Yes.
Yeah, it's about having those relational interactions with people in a way that actually is more conducive to being able to apply analytical reasoning.
Which, is hard depending on the system, you're working in, like we've talked about.
Yeah.
So what about availability bias?
So what Munro says about that is that we give more weight to information that is vivid or recent. So a single dramatic incident, like a parent shouting at a worker, might overshadow a year of subtle cumulative neglect because the vivid event is easier to recall. I mean, I can think of so many examples where I've probably applied availability bias, where I know I've seen it applied, because when you feel compromised yourself and you can't take on lots and lots of information, you can't recall it, and then you can't use it to kind of inform your sound judgment, you are just going to take the most recent exchange, aren't you?
Absolutely. The most vivid exchange.
Yeah.
It might not even be recent, but the one that you were a part of that
That's
impacted you the most is often, for me, where I go to in the availability bias.
Yeah.
And it's the bias that I pay the least attention to cognitively in my own practice, in my reflection. So I don't know what it is about this bias. Maybe it's a blind spot, but when I sit here and I read Eileen's work again, it is the one bias that I don't have a quick, reflex to. Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting.
It's the one I most overlook.
I think back to my child protection practice, it was there was two things. Actually, that's really interesting because for some families who might, things you might work really well with this person and then they might be having a bad day and then suddenly it's on. I was more likely to minimize that if I felt that it was just a one-off and that normally...
Really?
Yeah, isn't that interesting? But if for families that response just kind of fit the picture that I'd already formed, I mean, that would have been like the nail.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? I've never realised that before. Wow. God. That's super interesting.
Love biases.
Love it too. I love it too. And I love how it can really inform the way that we think about things to a point where we then make decisions based on flawed information.
Yes. And you think about this from the context of carers.
Yeah.
And how a single dramatic incident that might have happened years ago but is so vivid to them, that becomes their anchor sometimes for the way in which they think and express ideas about birth family or a work or the agency. Like, I think these biases can be, and carers are part of the care team.
Of course.
They are maybe not always considered professional carers, but they're part of the care team. And I wondered too about the biases that carers bring to the table. And I can think of some of the trickier situations involving oftentimes birth family or a carer not agreeing with something in the case plan. And I wonder about that availability bias. Because often when you drill in, this happened, and you would hear the same story repeated over years of case planning, but it's anchored back here in something that was so vivid to them, a memory of a wrongdoing of some kind.
Yeah. Or, I mean, how many carers have you worked with who have barriers up about being part of birth family contact, and it's because when you drill into it, yes, of course, there's that something's happened in the past, but I've also worked with carers who hang on to the fact that in their training they were told they would never have to be part of that and that they don't want the parent to know who they are.
Yeah.
Because then their safety is threatened. Do you know what I mean? Like thinking from 1995, like we've moved on from that. Because we now recognise that of course there's going to be those situations where you do have to put some safety measures around, but we've recognised that working as a collaborative team, birth family, carer, agency, whoever, actually is much more healing for the child.
Yes, where it's safe for the child.
Where it's safe, of course. It always goes down to that, the context, doesn't it?
Yeah. So the last kind of reasoning trap Eileen Munro talks about is over-reliance on compliance. So this is, I guess, we've talked a bit about toxic workplaces where we focus so much on meeting a deadline or a KPI or ticking a box for, case plan compliance or whatever the compliance measure is, that we lose the headspace needed for critical thinking and deep clinical assessment.
Yeah, I think we've talked about that already, haven't we?
Yeah.
Like it's the impact. Oh, sorry, it's probably the consequence.
I was going to say it could be all the cause.
Yeah, all the cause, true.
Chicken, egg, I don't know which one it is here, but that you feel like you're on a treadmill of just meeting this line of compliance, that line of compliance, this line of compliance.
Yeah. I mean, I think when our work becomes compliance driven to that degree, it's never going to be good work. Because how can it be? Unless you are putting in God, so much extra time that you'll never get paid for, you'll never get recognised for, which will actually eventually probably lead to burnout.
Yeah.
Then you are just kind of just doing what you have to do to keep your head above water.
It's interesting what that then says about the systems, isn't it? I'm talking about the large-scale systems that a lot of practitioners work in.
Well, I mean, I think when we think about how this isn't just an Australian thing, this isn't just a one field of practice thing. I think this is an internationally recognised issue for social work practice and for lots of other fields. But in social work, I think the fact that resources are so scarce and that it's all about competition and we have to be in competition with each other, then I think that compliance kind of goes hand in hand with that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So you have a system where it kind of functions on these kind of discourses of managerialism and accountability and, fiscal return at all costs.
Gosh, how many big words did you just put together?
What is wrong with me?
Impressed.
God, it's early too. Well, I mean, but if you have that, then your system is always going to suck. I wrecked it then. Very professional word.
I love it.
Very professional word, but it is.
Yep.
100% it is.
And part of what Eileen Munro talks about is that systems approach to error. And you're talking about very large-scale systems. And one of the kind of easily identifiable thoughts that run through my head when we were in a system like that is about, when mistakes did happen, how persecuted workers could feel and become, and the language generally other management used about the worker for making the mistakes. And so what Eileen Munro says is that it should be a systems approach to errors. So the errors occur because of latent conditions, so high caseloads, poor supervision or lack of quality supervision, lack of administrative support, cultural blame, whatever it may be. And when mistakes happen, we shouldn't be asking who messed up and why has this happened, but more around what made sense to the worker at that point in time that this decision was made.
100%. Have you ever been part of a child death review?
Yes.
It's the worst thing in the world, isn't it? It's horrendous because you're going into this knowing that this poor child, their life has been taken from them for whatever reason, whether it was accidental or not accidental, this child's life is gone. And you go into these this review meeting knowing with that baggage on your shoulders, knowing what that's done to this family, knowing the impact that's had for the community, just knowing that's huge. This huge thing has happened. And then you have to go in and you have to justify your actions down to the tiniest little detail. And I still remember, I think maybe twice, maybe once, maybe twice anyway, the one particular time where I was in one of these meetings and there was this whole preamble about that this isn't about the individual workers, this is about the system, this is about applying this kind of collective view to what happened, what could be different next time. All that was rubbish. It was because the actual context of the interview was about what did you do and when. Why didn't you do it that way?
Yeah.
It was horrendous. One of the most stressful things I've ever experienced.
I would agree with you there. Yeah. Very unpleasant and needed. Absolutely need a review into children's deaths, whether they're in the care of their parents or in the care of the state. Definitely we need to review them. But the way in which I've been a part of those meetings probably doesn't fit Eileen Munro's systems approach to errors.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And one of the most vivid things that I took away from that was the fact that I could not trust my colleagues at the time.
Well, that's going to do a whole lot more other unintended maybe things to your practice, isn't it? And to the culture of the workplace.
Well, it did. It certainly changed the way that I interacted with certain colleagues, and it certainly changed the way that it probably changed my practice a lot in terms of the way that I managed my team at the time.
Yeah.
instead of there being this reliance on collegial relationships, it was very much around let's put a little wall around ourselves because we can't trust those people. And that's not okay. In hindsight, it was terrible.
Siloed then, aren't you? And then what does the research say about culture practice when you're working in a siloed environment?
Yeah, absolutely. It was not good. It was not the best time of my life. Let's put it that way.
I can imagine. So how do we build better professional judgment then? Knowing about the common predictable errors that exist in different parts of practice.
What is professional judgment? Because I wonder whether there are different thoughts about what that actually is. Because I wonder whether we even think about professional judgment in the same way. So what is it?
Didn't we do an episode on professional judgment?
We did. What did we say? I can't remember.
Can we pause, listen and come back and record?
I mean, well, yeah. We should have done that, shouldn't we?
I mean, why are you asking?
Because I think the thing is that if we're saying how do we build professional judgment, someone sitting at home would be listening to this going, but what is professional judgment? What is it?
I'm pretty sure we said and we think it's where you use your skills, your knowledge, so your theory base, to help you make sense of what it is you're seeing from a particular family system or individual to decide a way in which you're going to practice, how you're going to move through, whether it's an issue, a dilemma, or a case plan goal, whatever it may be. You're using all your skills and knowledge plus the context of the person to make informed decisions about practice.
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Well, that's what we would have said it was in that episode, and I agree.
Let's hope.
I agree that that's what it is. But I think it is definitely about being reflective, but also having that reflexive approach to practice as well, isn't it? It's about sense making. It's about, which is what you said, but I'm just going to use those words, sense making.
Yeah, you use those words.
Because it makes much more sense to me. That's why I use it all the time. But it's about knowing that what happened before, this is what I did before in a similar scenario. This is the outcome of that scenario. Did it go well? Did it not go well? Can I apply the same reasoning in terms of information, skill, knowledge, whatever, to this current scenario? Can I not?
Yes.
That's kind of what it is. It's about, I think I just probably murdered what you just said because I think you said it much better. But the way I see professional judgment, it is about using everything to this moment in terms of your skill, knowledge, experience to make sense of this moment to move forward.
In addition to constantly reflecting on our own biases, our own values, and questioning where are my blind spots.
Yeah.
I think that is the added bit that maybe we didn't explicitly say then, but it's about our own values, biases, and our ability to reflect on them as well in supervision to understand what we're bringing to the table.
So then there's probably two clear ways then where professional judgment is developed. One is through that kind of relationship with the supervisor, where you're doing all of that stuff. That kind of, I think when you have that conversation with your supervisor, when the focus is on building professional judgment, it's like you have this like bird's eye view, don't you, where you're looking down at your practice. But the other mechanism for building professional judgment is that in the moment, that kind of sense making that happens in the moment. So there has to be two elements, I think, in terms of building professional judgment. We probably didn't say that in the last episode because that was very early on. I wonder if we did say that.
Who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
Yep.
Who knows? But I do kind of think there's two mechanisms to promoting professional judgment.
Yes. And I think if you consider also what you said earlier around toxic working environments, the culture of your organisation or your team is going to impact your professional judgment. And as we said, how do you hold a mirror up to that? How are you aware of that? Because it wasn't until we both left that workplace that we actually fully understood the impact on our practice, on ourselves.
Yeah.
The impact on our biases and our values too.
100%. The impact on your nervous system.
Well, that's just...
Like, that was huge.
You could not quantify that.
No. It was crazy. It was crazy. I didn't realise until after I'd left the effect
The effect.
that job had on me.
Me too. I always think about the frog in the saucepan. You know that story?
No.
Yes, you do.
What
Where
story?
you put a frog in a saucepan and you turn the element on so the water starts to heat up, but the frog's in the saucepan. So as the water heats up, the frog's got no idea it's going to be boiled because you're in the water and you are, submerged in this water and the heat's slowly rising. It's not a instant you chuck a frog into a boiling pot of water. He's in the pot. As the temperature rises, so does your body. You get used to it, right? Until all of a sudden the frog's boiling.
I feel so sad for that frog right now.
Have you ever heard that analogy?
I've never heard
Yes,
that
you
analogy.
have.
Have you said it to me before?
I don't know. Here's my assumption that every practitioner knows about that analogy, because don't we often talk about it in contrast with social work practice and practice, that sometimes we're like the frog in the water and we're so unaware of the temperature of the water because we're so submerged in it?
I mean, I actually makes sense. I feel sad for the frog. I can't get past the frog, but the analogy actually makes 100% sense.
Yeah.
Because you just go through this process of appeasing, don't you? Really, it's about appeasement, because you go through this process of adapting yourself to suit the environment.
Yes. And you think about the impact on your nervous system. We all have behavioural strategies that we use and to protect ourselves when we're falling down our ladder.
Yeah.
And then we adapt to that feeling.
Yeah.
We adapt to being on that place in the ladder, and then we don't know that it's actually not the space that we need to be in, because we get not comfortable there, but we learn to survive.
Yeah.
And we learn to make it work for ourselves.
Yeah. Which is why I think all of the literature, I don't know if I should say all, but lots of literature around burnout, vicarious trauma says that you need to have a separation between work and home.
Yes.
That you can't just socialise with the people that you work with. It can't be your life. There has to be separation.
Yes. And you need extremely good self-care rituals and routines.
Yeah.
That actually help you holistically in relaxation, in creativity, and in effort to balance the work impact.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so how do we, what is Munro saying in terms of how do we actually get to that place where we promote professional judgment, where we promote kind of caseworkers feeling comfortable to be skillful, I guess?
What does she say about that?
Well, I think what she kind of talks about, she's really big on reflective practice. She's really big on using the systems within the workplace to actually have this collegial sense of a shared responsibility, I think. Which I think group supervision is supposed to be this shared collegial experience of sharing
risk,
sharing problems. And I think maybe it depends on the skill of the facilitator, of course, but it's one of Eileen Munro's big things, that there needs to be this kind of this shared reflection of an experience that's supposed to be about facilitating learning.
And see, that's the key, facilitating the learning.
Yeah.
It's not about blame or shame.
No.
But it's about learning, and I think, as I also understand it, it's about accountability as well.
100%, because it's not just, because we can't ever get to this stage where we practice in an environment where we don't care about risk, because it's all about ourselves. We're the most important.
Yes.
Because we are not the most important element in a practice scenario. It should be the client. The client is the most important element in a practice scenario. And I think we have all worked with practitioners whose own needs overshadow the needs of the people they work with. And that doesn't work either.
No.
So you can't, that's the other end of the spectrum, isn't it? There needs to be this accountability in the practice that you do. We need to be able to admit the mistakes that we do, but we need to feel safe enough to do that. That, I think, is the difference.
Yes. And I think Eileen Munro says if you can explain why you made a decision, even if it's the wrong decision, then you're practicing ethically.
Yeah, I remind myself of that all of the time. When I write something or I do something or I recommend something and, I'm not sure about it, or it turns out to be, particularly if it's a recommendation that's not followed, which is fine, or if it's something that I think maybe I could have approached that a different way, I always remind myself that I made that decision for this reason. And I need to be able to articulate and verbalize why I made that decision, why I said what it is, or why I did what I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it makes me kind of go back to this place of reasoning, I guess, analytical reasoning. It kind of always goes back to that for me.
It's a good tip.
Is it? It was a bit garbled. It was like, blah, blah, blah.
It was not. It was a good tip.
Great. Okay.
Because you just helped me consider an assessment I'm doing, which is years later assessing the same people for a different thing. And so part of that I'm thinking, why did I make, I'm not super clear in some of my decision making.
Okay, I'm glad I helped you. Thanks. We're always being very helpful to each other, aren't we?
Some days.
Some days.
Some days there's no help at all.
That's not true.
It is true, it is.
All right. Are we done? What do you reckon?
I hope that we have done justice to Eileen Munro's work, because we are both probably super fans of Eileen Munro.
It's true.
We'll put a link in the show notes to her paper that talks about common mistakes in practice. It is old, but we think still so relevant.
So relevant. It's really relevant. And I know that in terms of currency, there's that 10-year window. Anything past 10 years, people go, oh, that's not relevant anymore. But honestly, just move past that and read this article because it's great.
It is great. And just be old like us and think 20 years ago was the 80s. That's where my kind of frame sits sometimes when I think, oh, gosh, that's old. That's from the 80s. It's 40 plus years old, but in my head it's 20. So just sit there with us.
Yeah, that's true. All right, let's wrap up. So that brings us to the end of another episode of Relational Practice, a social work podcast. We hope today's discussion was valuable for your practice.
To ensure you're always in the loop, please follow our podcast. Your subscription and social media engagement helps us build our community, and hopefully these discussions more accessible to other practitioners. Thanks for joining us today. Stay safe and remember to always practice relationally.
See you later. Bye, guys.